people that will trail in can catch chairs in the back there. So hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. What a beautiful day, and you've decided to spend it here at the Harn. Thank you. And I want to thank our guest conversationalists, Hector Puig and Dr. Barradas. And I just want you to feel at home here and to use this opportunity. To me, it is such a gift because I'm the curator of photography, and actually these prints, I helped curate this section of global perspectives with Hector Puig. And it has been such an enormous education for me. I did not know about a lot of these artists. Some of them I did hear about, but to also know the political context and the determination and the beauty and the activism that they brought to their art is an inspiration for now, I think. And it's also wonderful to bring students through here. And in fact, on Tuesday, we're having a group come through, and they specifically asked to talk about these prints here. So my education, thank you, Hector, and this is my first time working with Dr. Barradas. I'm sure it's going to be great. We want you to participate too. So when that opportunity comes, we'll do that. So first of all, can we silence our phones if anybody's got a phone that's still alive? That just makes it better because we are recording this. We have some docents in the audience. Thank you to Hector, who, for this global perspectives, the Harn is still catching up, collecting works from Mexico, the Caribbean, Southern United States, Latin America. And so to have access to his collection has just been enormous for us. So I thank you for that. This is the second change out that we've done with his collection in this section. And I think it brings a completion to this global perspective that we're trying to create in this gallery. Hector Puig, as many of you know, is involved in both collection and presentation. So you're probably familiar with his gallery, Hector Picture Framing and Gallery on University at 6th Street. He has been working at this for over 4 decades, making this city a remarkable place for the collection of not only UF professors, but local artists, but then just looking south to Miami, over to the Caribbean, to Mexico and Latin America. And not least, a beautiful collection of Santos, which you've probably seen in various collections here at the Harn and over at the University Art Gallery. His collection is a decades-long labor of love that gratefully benefits all of us. In fact, most exciting, and I think he'll be talking about this, is that his collection will now be having a permanent home in the way of a museum that's being built right now that is going to be part of the Santa Fe Community College campus downtown, and it's called Transform Art Museum and dedicated, I think, almost exclusively to the Puig collection. And it's just wonderful. And you'll see the name of the museum on the credit lines for these various works. And so Dr. Efraín Barradas is our UF professor emeritus. He received his PhD from Princeton University, where he specialized in Spanish and American literature. Before coming to UF, he was a professor at UMass Boston, where he was chair of the Department of Hispanic Studies and the Latin American Studies program. He was a visiting professor at the University of Puerto Rico and at Harvard University, and is the author of several books on Caribbean letters and Latino culture. Here at UF, Dr. Barradas taught at the Center of Latin American Studies in the Department of Spanish and Portuguese Studies, where he taught, which I think this is wonderful, the history of art through the ideas of Latin America and Mexican culture and Caribbean literature. It reminds me of Dr. Simon Schama, if any of you know him, as a historian who uses art as a way into history. So it's a beautiful combination. So please help me welcome Hector and Efraín. And just by way of a first question in to ask them, I love origin stories. So I wanted to ask each of them, what was the first heart-stopping experience that you had where you knew art could combine with culture and politics, whether it's literature or the visual arts, but something that really stopped your heart and made you realize you had to go further.
Well, thank you all so much for being here today. It really means a great deal to both of us. But like Carol said, thank you, Carol. Um, this project with Santa Fe, which we'll be talking about later in the way of questions, if you like, um, is has been quite a project, and I'm happy to inform that we're halfway there. The collection has been processed. 14 months in the making of processing thousands of pieces. But to answer Carol's, that's a loaded question, Carol. um, I started collecting back in 1986, really, and if I was to tell you the first moment that I had or that I realized I was turning into a collector was through a mentor and a professor, Leonard Kessel. I ended up representing him for over 25 years before he left us. But it was when I first got to know the body of work outside of what most people would call the quintessential Kessel that most people are familiar with. Back in the late 40s, 1949 to through 52, he had imagery that a lot of people wouldn't recognize as being his, but he's just a fascinating character and a fascinating artist. Um, and it was at that moment when I first acquired my first Kessel that I knew this was for me. So it goes back to that time period. I think it's on.
Awesome. Okay. Before I answer the question, I want to tell you that we would love, this is not a lecture but a dialogue, and it's a dialogue not between two but between all of us. So at any moment, if you feel you have a question or a comment, both of us will more than gladly welcome your comment or question. Well, in my case, where I first really started collecting was my first year in college. My grandmother died, and they were very poor. They were peasants from countryside in Puerto Rico, and she had had for many years several santos. You know, these are folk carvings of saints, and there was only one left. And before she died, she said I could have it. So that was my first santo, and that was my first piece that I collected. It's Saint Anthony, San Antonio, and she bought it directly from the santo maker. And so from then on, started collecting santos also. Nothing like Hector, please, nothing. Very modest collection. Um, but it started with that particular santo that I inherited, in a sense, from my grandmother. Um, there's a difference in the way we approach collecting. Hector is meticulous. He has a goal. He's looking for things. In my case, it's pure chance, pure luck, and something that I just happened to bump into, like that San Antonio that started it all. Also, I lived in the dormitory at the University of Puerto Rico, where I studied my undergraduate degree, and I wanted to decorate my room. And then you could go to places in Old San Juan, especially La Casa del Libro, which is a museum, a collection of absolutely magnificent early books. Um, and you could buy for $1 a poster. And those posters now, they're high, seal screen handmade posters by very important artists. uh, and you could buy it for $1. And so I decorated the walls of my room with about three posters, $3 worth of art. One of them is here in the collection. I gave it to the collection here. Um, It's a poster commemorating Dante, the author of the Divine Comedy, and it's by Lorenzo Mann, the man who made that print. I love in my classes. I walk around, so I'm going to be walking around. This by this man, Lorenzo Mann. You see the H here, and he made these posters for the Casa del Libro. So one of them, which is commemorating Dante, I gave to the Harn. So it's in the Harn collection. Uh, some others I have given to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and some of them I still keep under my bed because I have no storage area. So it was that Santo and those three posters that hooked me up, and I've been buying stuff since then.
Those posters are not $1 anymore.
No, no, no. They're not. They're not. They're worth a few $1,000s now. But it was a good investment. But I never. I was going to say a lie. I realized. I was going to say I never have sold any piece from my collection, which is not true. I needed money for the down payment for my second apartment in Boston, and I sold Rufino Tamayo print in order to to get money for the down payment. So I think that's the only. No, I also sold a Starn Twin photograph. Anyhow, but my approach, like Hector, is not making money, it's preserving art. Hector, what is your favorite piece of your whole collection, the whole entire
my.
collection?
That's a tough one because, and it's a question that I get a lot, even involving the Santos, even naming who's your favorite Santero, who's your favorite Santo maker, right? There's so many that meant so much because when I started collecting Santos in particular, and I became aware of the tradition having been part of my home island of Puerto Rico, right? So I had already been collecting art and outsider art for many years before I even became aware. When my father passed away in 1997, um, we went to visit the island to bury him there where he wanted to be buried. And at the time, I happened to visit this place and I saw examples of Santos from Puerto Rico that having grown up there until to the age of 13 and then moving here, I wasn't aware that the colonial tradition that exists in Mexico, New Mexico, um, Guatemala, Brazil, um, the Philippines, um, existed in Puerto Rico. And I became really interested is an understatement. It was more of a obsession, really. Dulce curated the exhibit, the first exhibit that we had at the Harn of the Santos exhibit. We traveled Puerto Rico together, and Dulce Roman, one of the curators here, um, curated that exhibit. Um, so I got to meet Santeros that had been already active for many, many decades. So when I got to meet them around 97, 98, when I first started collecting Santos, in particular from Puerto Rico, um, these are individuals who have already passed on. So I was very lucky to meet that generation that united the older generation of Santeros with the new. And this is a very long story, but a statement had been made that Santo making in Puerto Rico in his core had died with this one Santero that died in the 60s, I believe, Zoilo Cajigas y Sotomayor. And it wasn't my experience. It wasn't what I had experienced in 97, 98, 99, 2000 by visiting these Santeros that were in their late 80s, 90s. One of them had already was active at over 100. So if these Santeros were carving from the need to express their devotion and love for the what they were doing, and not necessarily obsessed over selling per se, but more because it was a calling, then that indicated to me that this statement that had been made was not indeed correct. So Dr. Barradas, I'll refer to him as Efraín because we've been friends for quite a while. Um, he stated earlier my technique of collecting with the Santos. It became an obsession for me to show visually, to have an exhibit that showed that the older Santos from the turn of the century, 19th century, late 19th, early 20th, that individuals were calling the real Santeros, were indeed powerful and very, very strong. Out of the close to 3,000 Santos that I have in my collection, 2,500 are what I would refer to as contemporary, 1950 to present day. Um, my goal was, let's show people that they're equally important, and the tradition does indeed continue. It doesn't just stop. So when I had an exhibit entitled Come Home to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the University of Florida's gallery, that I was asked by then Chair Richard Hype and Amy Vigilante, Dr. Vigilante, who she curated the exhibit. Um, it was my goal to show that. For the catalog Come Home, I asked Efraín to, with his impeccable writing style and knowledge, I wanted him to write about the collection. And when he finished, and he wrote both, because he's bilingual, the catalog is in Spanish and English. Um, when he finished the essay and I read it, uh, tears came down. I mean, I was just very emotional because it was as if what I had wished for had magically come true through his knowledge and words, because he stated that the tradition does indeed continue, that it did not die with Zoilo. I'm paraphrasing here, but that the tradition does continue, and that this clearly, visually, basically presents it to the whole world to see. So that was a very meaningful moment. That was probably one of the most emotional moments of as a collector that I had, to have a scholar like Efrain write something like that and present it, meant everything to me. So that's just from the Santos side. Um, so yeah, to choose one in particular is very difficult, but I'll bring it to today. Um, we have representatives present from the Santa Fe College Foundation Board. We have Michael Curry here with us, Patrice Boyce, uh, and Barbara Anderson with her husband here. Um, three of three members from Santa Fe, and I bring it up because Mike and I have been going to Puerto Rico. This will be our third trip coming up, and we've been talking to this artist who was a contemporary to Lorenzo Omar and Carlos Raquel Rivera. This painting, the wood, the lino cut right here on the bottom right. Um, his name is Jose Alicea. So here we are in Jose Alicea's home for the first time during the last trip, Mike and I come in, and I'm in my element immediately, because this guy is not only an artist who's 94 years old and active, but he's also an incredible collector. So I go through and I realize he has this beautiful, and Efrain was being modest earlier, by the way, his Santos collection is extremely well put together. So, yeah. So, like Alicea, I look at this collection, I go, my gosh, these are primo pieces, these are exquisite pieces. And I turn around and I see about 7 works by one of my favorite contemporary santeros, even though he's passed on, Hector Moya, who was an archaeologist and worked under Ricardo Alegría. Well, as it turns out, Hector Moya is Alicea's daughter's godfather, and they were close friends. So if I was to have to name a favorite contemporary Santero, it would probably be Hector Moya. So here I am with Mike, working on the Transform Art Museum, uh, networking and meeting artists, uh, learning about their body of work, and all of a sudden I'm in a home. And if you knew Hector Moya, it would be different because he was an extremely eccentric, private individual. I would say a handful of people maybe went inside his home while he was living in San German during the period of his last maybe 4 decades. So it wasn't easy, is what I'm saying, to know Hector Moya. Um, and here I was, sort of reminded of him, and besides his goddaughter, who was talking so tenderly about Hector Moya, and that would not be the the tone that I would use to talk about Hector Moya. He was lovely, and we had a tremendous friendship over the years. It developed, and I was lucky enough to get some of his most important works that he carved. He was a devout person himself, especially the Virgin of Montserrat, and he actually carved many pieces that ended up being pivotal in the contemporary uh, Santos art world that collectors wanted, and they just simply did not have access because he would not sell them to anyone. We struck up a friendship. It was many years in the making, and I ended up with Hector Moya's collection of his own body of work. So that was very meaningful, that trip.
Well, m- I just want to make a point about the works that are here, because I think it's very relevant. Again, if you excuse me, I'm going to move around because that was my teaching style. And so I move around the classroom all the time. But I want to point out uh, two pieces, or yeah, maybe three. Uh, One of them is, well, let's start with this one. It's more better. This is this is a classic Mexican print by uh, Jose Clemente Orozco, one of the three major muralists, Mexican muralists. Okay, and this over here, and you'll see why I hesitated and moved to the other one. It's by a man named Pablo O'Higgins. His name was Paul O'Higgins, and he was a gringo who went to Mexico and went native. And he started working with Diego Rivera, and he became a muralist, a printmaker, and this other piece over here is the one that I'm trying to get from Hector, is by Leopoldo Méndez, who was the founder of the Taller de Gráfica Popular. And Carol and I were talking before we began about how these artists worked together in workshops. And those workshops are still present in both Mexico and in Puerto Rico. But I want to point out those three later to come to two other pieces. This one, which is by Rafael Tufino from Puerto Rico. Tufino fought in World War II, and with money from a veteran scholarship, he went to Mexico and studied in Mexico. And he married a Mexican woman, his two children, one of which is an artist, lives in New York, his daughter. Uh, he is highly influenced by the Mexican tradition of the Taller de Gráfica Popular. Okay, the same thing happens here by Carlos Raquel Rivera, who's also the author of this painting that you see here. But there's apparently a great difference between the two of them, because this one which is called Huracán del Norte, Hurricane from the North. It's about US imperialism in Puerto Rico. Okay, so it's really very, very, very political. This one here, it's quite subtle. It's not as political at the beginning. When you look at it, you don't see the politics behind it. But really, it's a very political piece, and it's a wonderful piece because you can see that Carlos Raquel Rivera was not only looking at the politics, but he was also highly influenced by surrealism. Note that little butterfly over here. Note the fact that the main character in the painting has his face hidden by the plants. Okay, so there's a great difference between this one and that one. But there's a great similarity between those pieces, and it's that if you want to study Latin American art, 20th century Latin American art, you have to start with Mexico because it was an incredible, incredible school of art, not only in painting. Hector cannot afford a Diego Rivera painting, nor can I, but we can afford some pieces like the Orozco or my beloved Leopoldo Mendez. I have several Leopoldo Mendez, but I really want this one because it's a self-portrait and he is making fun of himself and he is looking at us and many things are happening in the back. And he's saying, he's saying, I don't care what happened in the back. That's not true. But it's a very political piece. So the point that I want to make is that there's an incredibly strong connection between Mexico and Puerto Rican art. Okay, and this is very well presented in this small collection. Okay, so those prints, that painting, okay, reflect that. Now there is another step here, which is we might go and see this piece here, which is Juan de Dios Mora. He is Mexican American living in the frontera, okay? And this here, which Hector, it's one of Hector's favorite, and Hector asked me to speak about this. This is Juan Sanchez. He's a Puerto Rican from New York. So what we have here, it's Latino art. And I want to make this point very, very, very clear. And if you only leave this afternoon with this point clear, you'll make me very happy. There's a major difference between Latin American and Latino. Okay? This is Latin American. This is Latino. Okay? And this is a man of Latin American origin, in his case, Puerto Rico. This is a man from Latin American origin, in his case, is Mexican, but they live in the United States and they have a different attitude. They do talk about Latin America, but from the US perspective. Okay? We'll talk about this piece later on, but I really would like to encourage you to participate and ask us questions. So
I'll just add one more thing to what you pointed out between Mexico and the collaboration of Mexico and Puerto Rico, and they're really meccas for the golden age of printmaking, both Puerto Rico and Mexico. And when I started collecting, as I told you, my first piece was a Kessel. I very quickly noticed that how artists gravitate towards each other. So you always have these groups of artists, whatever city you're talking about, it doesn't matter. They gravitate towards each other. And if they respect each other, they start trading, they start collaborating with each other. All kinds of things are happening simultaneously. That really fascinated me. That was one of the key elements for me to collect based on how that relationship happened, how that transpired. So as an example, Lenny happened to be neighbors with Hiram Williams, and he introduced me to Hiram Williams. And I remember like yesterday, the day I met Hiram Williams, became friends immediately. I started framing all of Hiram's work because he was sick of framing it himself. So he entrusted me. I ended up selling, moving a lot of his work. Um, and that relationship really fascinated me. So the collection, as Efraín pointed out, just in these 11 pieces, because there's a piece right here by Luis Alonso, um, another Puerto Rican artist, shows the how these pieces sort of like connect to each other one way or another. Where it just so happens that Tufino traveled to Mexico and collaborated and met a lot of these folks that Efrain is talking about. There's a very famous, two famous portfolios. The one that involves that cane cutter, and also, well, three: the coffee portfolio, and also the portfolio of plenas, which are folk songs from Puerto Rico. And there's a total of 12, six by Rafael Tufino, six by Lorenzo Omar. And I have those in the collection. But my point is that before Tufino finished his coffee portfolio, which is clearly started in Mexico because he traded Anton Refrigier, a Russian muralist who had traveled to Mexico, had met one of Frida Kahlo's students, Arturo Garcia Bustos, and was involved in the Guatemalan revolution and traveled to Guatemala. Uh, all of those elements tell a story of individual friendships between these very famous artists, Pablo Higgins being one of them, Tufino, the Russian, who I have many pieces by, um, Tufino himself. Um, and this is the kind of storytelling and intertwining that I'm trying to show in the future by presenting all of this in a space where you'll be able to see and know and have the story of all these relationships happening, not just the pieces as they stand on the wall, which by itself, obviously, they're impressive, but it's fascinating to see that relationship happen.
Can I jump in real quick?
Sure.
Is that I love that connection. I think that the notion of workshops and their traveling to one another and the conversations they were having, but the baseline through all of this, which we may find a little disturbing, but to me, I find it liberating, is the politics that underwrote all of that. The fact that a Russian was coming to Mexico was because of the Communist Party and socialism that was rising up and the revolutionary spirit to have their own independence. That was what was driving all of this. And I think we can't lose that. And I know that it's a very sensitive topic in our day and age, but I just wanted to put that on the table.
Let me continue Carol's idea with an example, which goes to that point, but also goes to my uh, crazy work of collecting. I owned it. I don't have it anymore because I donated it to the Museum of Fine Art in Boston. A print by Leopoldo Mendez. In 1937, then president of Mexico, Lázaro Cárdenas, nationalized the petroleum industry, which represented a major problem with the United States because basically the Rockefellers owned the Mexican oil. And so Lázaro Cárdenas nationalized it, and that created Pemex, Petróleos Mexicano, which is still the big petroleum company. There was it was not easy move for Lázaro Cárdenas to do this. So there were rallies, people rallying, supporting Lázaro Cárdenas. And so Leopoldo Méndez made a handout uh, about this whole issue, and it's a nest with vultures attacking. And that handout was given out. You know, it was a Leopoldo Méndez for free. It was given out to people in rallies. But then Leopoldo Méndez took the main image, not the words around it, and made a print. I was able to get that print from the estate of a friend who died, and he had that print. And that was not numbered, but signed by Leopoldo Mendez. Many, many, many years later, I'm walking through a flea market in Mexico, and I found the original handout. So I gave the Museum of Fine Art in Boston both the print, sign, and then the handout, which is an absolutely fabulous comparison. But it shows not only my serendipitous way of collecting and how saints protect me and guide me to where I find them. I'm an atheist, by the way, but but the image comes very smoothly and appropriately. But anyhow, the it shows what Carol is talking about. These are very, very political pieces. That is a very political piece. Sure. Uh, this is by Juan Sanchez. As I said, he is uh, a man of African descent, Puerto Rican African descent, who was born and lived in New York. And he is both a painter and a graphic artist. Hector has this beautiful painting, which is different from what he usually does. Because basically he is highly influenced by Catholicism. And he's very political, but what he wants to do is altarpieces. And this is going to work as an altarpiece. Usually what he does is a triptych. You will have another piece here and another piece here. So that's why I say this is different, because this is only one piece, while he usually have two. Okay. Now he goes back to this is dedicated to a woman who was a political prisoner, Puerto Rican political prisoner, and he will incorporate different elements. You can see here lace, okay, and you can see the photograph and the feet of a working class woman. Uh, this is what we call chancletas. Okay, and chancletas is a power symbol. Okay, it's what mothers will lift up in the air and say, you better behave, if not my chancleta is going to be fly to you. Okay, so what you might think of as nothing, it's important, very important. And the delicacy of reconstructing the Puerto Rican flag with lace, but they're very good details. Now, he is also highly influenced by the graphic artists and especially the posters. Now, posters combine a figure and lettering because it's an announcement. Okay, and so you can see how he uses lettering, but they're very wonderful little details. If you come here, you can see this here. That is a Taino motif. Tainos were the indigenous people from Puerto Rico. So what he really is saying here is we are, and this is a very, 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 very important point that we owe greatly to many Latin American scholars, but many of them Mexicans. We are mestizos. We are a combination of races. We are a combination of cultures. Okay, so this tiny little detail, which might be lost, it's important. That's saying, hey, we are Latin, we are Tainos, we're indigenous people too. Okay, and I will say here the combination of the lettering. Note how he also keeps the color scheme of the flag, red, white, and blue. Okay, so even the color scheme is, but also the fact that it's an individual, Maria Aide Torres, the political prisoner, but it's pueblo, the people. And so it's a extremely political piece. Okay, and it's a piece One, lettering, posters, Taíno, mestizaje. Okay.
So building on the statement made in the upper left here, somos taínos, somos mestizos. I had a question for you guys and actually didn't realize that you were going to talk about Santos at all here. That's very exciting. So noticing when you told us about how you started collecting and what you mentioned, it seems like it's specifically Catholic Santos, or are there any Afro-Caribbean Santos included? Because that's also an important part of the fabric. to-
That's a very interesting question because it's a confusion between Santeria and Santo making.
Mhm.
And so Santo making is Catholic, Santeria is Afro-Caribbean, and
Gotcha.
it's completely different.
Yes.
But they I don't think we have an example here that could serve to show that point. Yeah, but no,
But it's interesting
uh,
because when Mr. Puig was talking, he said that santeros. And so in different dialects of Spanish, that refers to somebody who practices santeria. So in the context that he was referring to, it seemed like you were talking about the people who make these prints.
Yeah,
or
that's why I said Santo makers.
Santo.
Santeros in Puerto Rico are Santo carvers,
Oh,
people that carve Santos.
sculptures.
Well, they are folk. You will find, you did find that um, in the late 1830s, 19th, and throughout the middle of 19th with the Espada family in San Germán, that part of, one of the oldest part of Puerto Rico, right? Where Portacelli is the oldest church in the, even older than the one in San Augustine. Um, and that's come back. That whole, you refer to them as sculptures, that sculptural, anatomically correct movement in the sculpture that you find in Spain from the tradition that all this comes from, has had a comeback in recent years, meaning in the past 20 years, right?
Oh,
But every place that has been colonized by Spain has carried on the tradition of Santo making, carving Santos, based on the Catholic foundation, and have achieved a unique style that, upon looking at them, someone like Efraín and myself can tell you that's Brazilian, that's Guatemalan, that's New Mexico, that's Philippines, this is Puerto Rico. So there are styles that will give them up, basically. But yes, um, take Cuba, for example. In Cuba, the Santeria is overtakes the Santo as we know it in Puerto Rico, Santo making. There are certain towns in Puerto Rico, like Ponce, Loíza, uh, Atillo, Guayama, who have a very strong Afro-Caribbean background, and they have incorporated in those towns their own style, and you will find pieces that are and carry the names of African religions that were brought by the slaves, and they use Catholic imagery, like Saint Lazarus, right? Like El Justo Juez, the Christ on the cross with all the symbols of the crucifixion, and they gave them African names,
mhm.
but they put up the fixtures on their walls so that their quote unquote masters didn't realize that they were still practicing African religions and not Catholic.
But
So,
isn't it true that pretty much all of the Afro-Caribbean Santos have a counterpart in Catholicism?
indeed,
So my question, which I was leading up to, is do either of you have any Afro-Caribbean representations in your collections, and why or why not?
I have pieces. Is too long of a story to go into, but I have pieces that, for example, I'll take one example: the Horta family in Ponce, um, super famous family. The patriarch passed away. The the mother also, Santia Horta. So all the children carved. Every single one of them were carvers. That's how they basically lived. Um, the oldest Horta moved to Miami um, many years ago for quite a while, and he was so homesick, he did a Lazarus, Saint Lazarus, saw using a piece of machete that he himself uh, made very sharp and carved from mahogany as a Lazarus from the table. It's about this big, and left it unpainted, which is rare, right? Well, he befriended a Cuban friend that begged him to please let him have this Lazarus. And he said, take it, Unbeknownst to Jose, his Cuban friend practiced Santeria. So he took it to his altar. And for years, there were candles, oils, perfume, all kinds of things put onto the sculpture. Um, and many years later, he fell into some hard times. His friend did. And he blamed the saint. In this case, the yeah, Babaluaye, yeah, and was going to destroy the piece because he blamed the saint. Jose, which his nickname is Papo, heard about this, and he then begged him to please let him have the saint back. Why? Because I had recently met him. I had asked for like 14 pieces, one of which was Lazarus, and he wanted me to have that Lazarus. So he rescued the Lazarus. And unbeknownst to me, he didn't tell me this until after the fact. He cleaned it, he cleaned everything. And I wish he had left it just the way it was because it would show the history of the piece. But that's one example that I can tell you of a piece that transformed, no pun intended, transformed from one to something else to something else. He shipped it. One of the crutches broke in the shipping. And from Miami, he sent his wife and daughter to drive up to pick up the piece, drive it down for him to fix it. And he drove it back up just because he felt so bad about this. This is just an example of one piece that I have that, and there's others that almost involve both. But my foundation was I was raised Catholic. I don't practice. I'm not a practicing Catholic. Um, I would say I'm more spiritual. You could call me agnostic. I'm not ready to yet proclaim I'm an atheist like Efraín, but I have a strong spiritual foundation in the Catholic Church. And when my father, who was extremely devout in a very private way, very devout Catholic, um, to honor him really, when he passes away in 97, I discovered the Santo tradition in Puerto Rico, and I just dive in full body into the pool, into learning about this tradition in Puerto Rico, where the country where I come from, where my father grew up in, and in a way, in some, and this is the first time that I've really thought about it from the perspective that you're talking about, almost to honor him really. I shift from having a few Santos from New Mexico because, like I told you, I collect outsider art and folk art and primitive art, whatever branch you want to use, um, threw me into the world of Puerto Rican Santo carving
Gotcha.
as such.
So last question for you on
Yeah.
the same topic. So would you say that it's just a personal preference for you both? The fact that you prefer the Catholic Santos based on your personal history? Or would you say that's more indicative of maybe a difference in how that cultural history is accepted, assimilated, and respected. Because in Cuba, it is. And we're cousins, you know?
You have to answer your question, you have to go back to history. Okay. And so in 19th century, Cuba developed an immense sugar industry. Haiti, the Haitian Revolution came about, so the Haitians were not going to continue with the sugarcane because that was slavery. So Cuba took over, and there were thousands and thousands and thousands of Africans who were brought. So that's why you have such a strong African-based culture in Cuba. The case of Puerto Rico was different because Puerto Rico never had, in the 19th century, a dominant agricultural field. So what happened in Puerto Rico is that the coast, which is flat, became sugar producing. The center became coffee producing, and the valleys in the center became tobacco producing. So in the 19th century, what you had in Puerto Rico was a very balanced agricultural production of three products. But that meant we never had the number of African slaves that Cuba had. Never. Also, in 1815, the Spaniards, afraid of what had happened to the French in Haiti, passed a law which is called Real Cédula de Gracia, which said any European, non-Spanish European, but Catholic, can migrate to Puerto Rico and will be given land in the interior. So what happened in Puerto Rico, and this, what I'm going to say might sound racist, and please don't take it as such, but Puerto Rico is the whitest of the three Antilles. Because of that, we never had the great sugar industry that Cuba had, and the Spaniards, afraid of what happened in Haiti with the Haitian Revolution, opened up the door. So, you know, a very Puerto Rican last name is Petrovich. Okay, a very Puerto Rican last name is Anton Giorgi. So Italians, French, Russians who were Catholic, they had to be Catholic, came to Puerto Rico. So there is in our case in Puerto Rico, the Catholic is stronger than what you will find it. But if you go to my house, the front door, and my friend Barbara here can vouch for this, there are 3 Eleguas, okay, and a mezuzah, which I'm still looking for the right one. The one that I have, I don't like. But my friend Barbara here, it's helping me find the right mezuzah that I want. I consider myself an atheist, but I respect all religions, and I love the symbolism of religions. So Santeria, I mean, for me, Elegua is as welcome in my house as it would be San Antonio, it would be a mezuzah. I don't discriminate. On the contrary, I'm open to. Okay,
Yeah,
and
and
not
to,
only that, many more will protect me, and so I'll be protected by all of those.
yeah, and just to answer your question, in my case, I had the very first santo that I owned was Cosme and Damian from the Brazilian devotions. It was a Brazilian santo of Cosme and Damian, twin brothers that were physicians, and they would help people if they allowed them to talk about the Catholic religion. So then I have a friend who lives in Gainesville, who's a huge collector of 20th century outsider American art. He got me into Santos because he met a bunch of Santeros from New Mexico. And he gifted me several Santos. Those were my first Santos from New Mexico. It was really purely an aesthetic attraction that really moved me, the aesthetic attraction. Being a very visual person that I am, that's what initially moved me. But going back to your question, the reason why it's only Puerto Rican Santos and only colonial, tradition is because I know myself. And there is no way that if all Santos are open game, instead of 3,000, it would be more like, 30,000. And I'd be going nuts because you wouldn't know what was what, the average person. So I made a very clear decision early on. As a matter of fact, I gifted the New Mexican Santos I gifted one to my older sister, who's very devout, and I sold the other one. Um, and
Not to me.
not to Efraín, yeah. So the decision was strategically made, not made because of my personal belief or not wanting to pay tribute to, because I'm very much attracted to just like Efrain said, to the imagery of the Afro Caribbean, very much attracted to it. But I know myself good enough to know if I open the door, there'll be no closing it.
So I know when the museum opens, we're going to have to come see that Santos collection. I just wanted to ask anybody in the audience if you have questions. Yes. Mhm. Inclusive.
Well, you might call me a collector, but I really am someone who's holding for a while a piece of art. I'm gonna die. My will is already made, and it's what I'm looking is for a safe place for that object that will be kept, and a place where it will be appreciated and where uh, it would have meaning. Okay, I'm gonna go back, and I think this is going to be my final say here in terms of because of the time, but going back to the images of an African images and my style of collecting. I was in Salvador de Bahia, and I went to an antique shop and I saw these beautiful, beautiful carvings. The woman who showed them to me said they were 18th century. I knew well enough that they were 19, but still they were very expensive. I couldn't buy them. And I have a very adventuresome friend who is a professor at the University of Maryland, and she happened to bump and know this man who promised her to take her to Ama de Santo, which is a woman who deals with Santeria in Brazil. And she said, "Would you come with me?" And I said, "Sure." I put on my anthropologist hat and went and met the woman, and she said things. I was very interesting, but she discovered that I like Santos. And she said, "Well, here's this little card, and go and tell them that you come from me." So I went back to the store and I said, so sent me and gave me this card. Prices went down immensely. And I was able to buy 4 Brazilian Santos, which are in my collection. So you see, there are 2 points to this story. One, my it just happened that I bumped into this woman and I got to buy the Santos. I am not like Hector, who plans it. It just happens. And secondly, this is through Amaya de Santo that I got my 19th century Brazilian carvings, which are very beautiful.
Well, I find the question very important and relevant because I agree, collectors should have what you refer to as what's the goal, right? What's the purpose? What is it that you're trying to, what is your responsibility? So to tell the story as short as possible, because we're running out of time, I made a decision for numerous reasons, and having dealt with many collections and seen how many of my friend collectors that had passed and seen the collection disintegrate or move into 500 different places that's no longer able to be seen as a collection. It really broke my heart every time that I was involved in one of those. So I made a very difficult decision because my environment defined me as a person. But I made a decision because I had lost several very close friends, not to COVID, but unexpectedly, all but one. Uh, Six, in fact, six people in the past few years, 4 or 5 years. And I made a conscious decision to talk to my daughters and my wife and tell them what my concern was and what they thought. I had a conversation with my good friend Michael Curry from the Santa Fe Foundation. And I thought this is the only way to achieve what you're referring, what you're talking about. I'm going to donate this collection in large part to achieve the story, to achieve the opportunity to teach generation after generation after generation of the thousands and thousands of students that go through Santa Fe College and the University of Florida that come through Gainesville. Think about how many people come through the Horn Museum and what they learn from the artists that are shown here. Well, think about moving that into also the world is becoming this small, like, every day it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. And addressing what Carol said earlier about the political relevance of the work. What attracted me, Carol, what attracted me to the works that I've selected outside of the beauty of their aesthetic and the complexity of printmaking, because I'm a not about printmaking. I love all forms of printmaking, right? From woodcuts to intaglio, etchings, lino cuts, whatever, silk screens. I love it. I'm very much interested. But what tied me was the human aspect of it. That collaboration of artists, whether it happened in front of me because I knew Lenny and Hiram and Paul Fullerton and uh, my high school teacher, for goodness sakes, was Stuart Purser's daughter, who literally made me continue in the arts instead of focusing on baseball, because I really came here to play baseball. So Stuart Purser's, who the Horn owns several paintings by, his daughter, right, Jean Cameron, told me, no, Hector, you are an artist. You have to continue. If it wasn't for Jeannie, I wouldn't have applied. I was already going to Tallahassee to our great rival to study graphic art. And here comes Santa Fe after seeing my AP portfolio from high school and offers me a full scholarship. And I said, well, I'll stay. I guess I'll stay. And this many years later, this happens. And I feel it's an obligation. I felt it in my heart as an obligation to share Puerto Rican history, Latin American history, Latino, as Efraín was pointing out, the very critical differences, and also beyond. But it came from that human interaction. The fact that regardless of our politics or regardless of what we believe in, whether we're devout Catholics or atheists, there is a respect there always. And I wanted to present all of this in that context, if that makes any sense. It was more for me as a collector from a human perspective rather than any political stand or religious stand. Like Efraín, I'm very much attracted to all the religions and the iconography that goes along with them. My neighbor of 18 years was Mickey Singer. So we know that what kind of imagery he loves, and I love it too, believe you me, but I know better than to dive into something that my style of collecting, as Efraín pointed out, in order to collect one artist, I need to have at least a thorough representation of the body of work of that artist. And if it's a new artist like Francis Gallardo or Jota Malavé that are in their mid-30s or early to mid-30s, I need to see and believe that there's commitment there, that they're going to indeed be artists and continue on making art, not just, for a little bit. So that's my criteria, basically. It came more from a human perspective.
Hector is missing one very important step. It's very nice, but he's missing one step, which is we as collectors have to convince curators that what we love should be in a museum. And that is not an easy job because I'm sorry, I'm not trying to offend anyone, but we look, Hector and I love these things, but we have to convince other people that these are things worthy of keeping. And so we have to teach the collector, the curators and the museums, this is worthwhile, this is worthwhile. So we have a very important task, which is how to transform our love for those objects into a kind of diplomatic and rational statement for collectors, for museums to understand that they should keep these things.
I agree, and I have to say that I've learned so much from working with Hector, so and talking with you today. So I think that's a perfect place to end, isn't it? So thank you, everyone, and thank you, Hector and Efraín.
Thank you.